There we go. So those are the three things I want to talk about. And I guess the last one is I think we need a model. I think now is the opportunity to think about a more coherent model about how we describe community-led housing. And I get the fact that actually that might mean co-housing, it might mean land trusts, it might mean a whole range of things. But actually, how we pull that together as something that is a larger mass than any one of those individual things is absolutely critical, I think, at this stage. And I think there are some real opportunities out there. So where I want to start, let me see if I can make the technology work. That was what it was called, Into the Maze. The reason it was called that is because I want to think there is a maze here that you work through, and there's a whole range of stuff out there that I don't think that generally a lot of us know about, but that will provide us with opportunities. So, firstly, who's heard of localism? Who understands all of the enabling rights that have come out of localism and how you might use those? Great. So localism. So here's the classic example. I use this again. So Pompey Football Club, right? 2010, May 2010, we're in our second cup final. We were 1-up against Chelsea. All was going well. All of a sudden, actually, 2 years later, we've gone through administration twice. And the only way out of that chaos is to buy the club ourselves as supporters and to grow it from the grassroots up. It is about paying your debt to the newsagent down the road and working out how you do that. Now it's interesting because the sort of decline and then rise again of Pompey Football Club sort of mirrors what went on in this country. Everything is going along swimmingly just before 2010, then it all falls off a cliff. And actually we're into that space where none of us are quite sure what's going on. So there are a whole range of new strategies out there and policy initiatives that actually we need to engage with at this stage. And rather than waiting for somebody to say, this is your guide through it, jump into the space, right? So several years back, I had the pleasure of meeting Naomi Klein, who had just finished writing Shock Doctrine. Naomi Klein at that point in time was pointing out the fact that actually when there are shocks of any form, political, natural, wars, whatever it might be, it's who inherits the space afterwards that drives the next paradigm. So the classic being, after Hurricane Katrina in Chicago, something like 90% of the schools were publicly owned before that. 6 months afterwards, they're all privately owned. So somebody's making profit out of it. Now, what went on in this country in the financial collapse, to a certain extent, is a shock. And actually, if we wait to see how we dig ourselves out of that, somebody else will inherit the space, rather than us as communities saying, okay, we've got now a whole bunch of things that we can use, all these wonderful enabling rights. How do we use them to do the things that are right for our communities to make them sustainable and resilient? So, very rapidly, and I'm going to canter through some of these, and I'm just going to throw them up there. I'm assuming that the presentations will be made. We're going to try and share them all on the website afterwards. So there's a set of notes that I'm happy to provide with this as well, and there's a set of resources at the end that will allow you to sort of find out a little bit more about them. I would point you to the locality website and the My Community website in terms of the community rights and the funding that goes with them. But very briefly, right to challenge and right to bid. Right to challenge is around community, voluntary sector groups coming together to challenge to run services for local authorities. May not seem to be a logical route to go around acquiring land and assets and buildings, but often they need, and most services need, some form of building to run from. So if you are thinking about providing a service alongside your housing provision, there might be a way through there. It might be worth just thinking about. If nothing else, it helps you to start thinking about your business model and what your business model looks like in terms of revenue funding beyond it. Right to bid. First right to bid that went through is the Ivy House pub in Nunhead. It's around preserving services that are critical within your community, or assets rather, that are critical within your community. You apply to the local authority to get the asset listed as an asset of community value. You have to continue the use of the asset in the form that it was existing in when it was listed, so you can't change the use of it. What it means that if the owner of that building chucks it up for a freehold sale or a long leasehold sale, you can trigger a 6-month moratorium period to get a business plan together to acquire the asset. They don't need to say yes to you in terms of your tender, but it works. There are a significant number of shops, pubs, beaches, car parks, you name it, now in community ownership as a consequence of community right to bid. The Nunhead pub which was the first one. The pub exists and there's 2 floors of flats above it. And the revenue from the flats supports the driving of the public house, if that makes sense, yeah? Neighbourhood planning, we caught up with neighbourhood planning. There are, I think it's Redcliffe, Lockleys, Old Market is another one. There are all sorts of, Long Ashton have done one as well, haven't they? So there's lots of groups in and around Bristol that are doing neighbourhood planning. Interestingly, what's happening in terms of neighbourhood planning is groups at that level are looking to allocate sites for development. So those things that would never be necessarily seen as a strategic site within local plan making processes have the opportunity to come forward within neighbourhood plan making processes. They're also based in robust planning policy, and they've got, a shelf life, but the point is they are community led. One of the things that's coming out of that now is how do you deliver those things? So, catch up with things like neighbourhood development orders, catch up with community right to build orders. They may well be a mechanism by which actually you as community members can come together in groups and mobilise around the delivery of elements of those plans. Neighbourhood development order can grant planning once it goes through its referendum process. And just to be clear about the neighbourhood planning bit of it, you have to designate an area, so you define a geographical area. You do the work in terms of engagement to understand how the area should be developed, spatial planning policy. You write your planning policy, it then goes to a referendum of all of those people that live and or work within that defined geographical area that are on the electoral register. So it's a different route in terms of planning. It doesn't go through, if you like, the Development Control Committee route. Neighbourhood development orders and community right to build orders follow the same process but grant planning permission. Now I'm going to come back to a right to build order and the importance of community-led planning processes. So catch up with it. And again, I would say to you, have a look at the stuff around My Community in terms of the website and the resources that exist. So there is a funding stream that exists for community-led development right now to bring forward housing, which is undersubscribed, and it supports pre-feasibility and feasibility work. So if you've got a shot at something, here's your opportunity to secure some money to actually think about how you might test it out. And feasibility and pre-feasibility money is ridiculously difficult to get hold of. I've gone backwards again. I'm really useful with the technology. So this is your sort of tools of the trade, or the new tools of the trade. Challenge right to bid on this side, probably less useful, but may well be worth thinking about. On the other side, the stuff around neighbourhood planning. Now they are enabling rights. They have to be picked up by people to use them. They're not things that actually, we are forced to use. So moving. I slipped one there. Moving on to other mechanisms. 2 sets of other mechanisms for me. The ones on the left-hand side as you're looking, sort of non-planning related. So they're things that actually exist already that you might be able to use or think about using to bring forward discussions around land. I think Chris mentioned and others mentioned the whole idea of, if you don't ask if somebody's put something up for sale, what's the opportunity, you may never find out. Strangely enough, actually gifts and legacies do exist, because actually you find somebody who, yes, they do want a bit of a return on it maybe at some point in time, but they're more willing to work for you. If you don't ask and you don't find out, you'll never know. Community asset transfer. I think there's going to be a huge opportunity around community asset transfer. I think local authorities now are looking at a fire sale by and large. I think they do want to generate capital receipts from the assets that are about to divest of themselves, but I think a number of those are politically challenging to divest themselves of. And if communities come together and mobilise in the right way, actually you might be thinking about solutions for those assets that not necessarily generate a huge return, but remove the political burden from making the decision about divesting of them, if that makes sense. So you come up with alternative solutions that are based in the community. So community asset transfer, well worth looking at and getting your head round. The other two, the right to reclaim land and the right to contest, I've never come across anybody who's actually used these yet, so I'm asking again. So the right to reclaim land basically allows you as a community to ask your local authority or any other public body to effectively sell land that's underused that can be brought back into some sort of economic benefit. There's a prescriptive process for the right to the Secretary of State and the rest of it, but it's an opportunity and it's worth looking at. The other one in terms of right to contest is around government-owned land that allows you to, again, ask them to provide the land for better economic use. So both housing, employment use might come out of those sorts of things. Clearly they're looking for capital receipts, but again, if you don't start the dialogue, you never know. The other ones I think everybody's mentioned before. I genuinely do believe in all of the work that I've done, and I've been doing this sort of stuff now for probably 15 years. Most deals can be done. You just have to find the right trigger. You just have to be patient and prepared to keep knocking at it, sort of thing. And information is the thing that all too often we don't garner ourselves with. So find out stuff about the site, find out stuff about the ownership of that site, get yourself some initial modelling done so that you start to understand, you can start to engage in a different way. So the three sort of planning related ones, and I call them planning related because often what will happen is you can get a mechanism whereby you agree that you can work up the plans for the site, and what that does is it triggers a sale based on the value of the planning uplift that you get. So the one that I like most of all, to be honest with you, is the option agreement. And I genuinely think that the opportunity that will come forward in terms of brownfield sites is a huge one. Most developers don't like brownfield sites, they come with a multitude of constraints. Most communities think that brownfield sites should be developed. Actually, of course, the chances are the landowner is the one who's got the inflated view about how much that land is worth. But if you can work an option agreement where you can work up the plans without needing to spend a huge amount of money in the option agreement, then you've got an opportunity, particularly, I think, if you mobilise around planning. Let me see if I can get this to work the right way now. So your routes to planning. I mention this because if you look at it, the top bit of it is around the local plan stuff. So Chris threw up the development plan document, strategic sites for Bristol. That's sort of local plan level. Now, neighbourhood plans need to be in conformity with local plans, but could be looking at allocating sites in a different way. So providing they meet that growth, they might be thinking about different sites, and there's an opportunity there in terms of size and scale. The other thing to say is within the neighbourhood planning suite, you've got neighbourhood development orders and community right to build orders. They both, or all that stream, goes through referendums. So it is about mobilising local people to get involved in a different way. Do get engaged with it if you get the opportunity, because it is about your opportunity to shape the places in which you live and work in a different way. It does talk about design. It does talk about where development should come forward. It talks about the nature of that design. So design guidance is there, stuff around going beyond conventional planning policy in terms of renewables is there. So all of those opportunities exist. And of course, actually, there are a significant number of neighbourhood plans made, just over 100 now, that some of them have within them policies around bringing land forward for self-build. And it's written in as a policy that they will try and bring sites forward in that way. I think what we're now seeing is we're seeing lots of that go upwards in terms of local plan making processes and local planning authorities building in policies around self-build and wanting to allocate sites for self-build. So again, there's an opportunity there. And if it's around community-led self-build, you can think about how those structures work in a different way, which relates back to the stuff that Tim was talking about and also Chris was talking about in terms of how you hold land, if that makes sense, to make sure that actually we've all got a chance 20, 30 years down the line rather than the inflationary cost of land going up, which means that actually we screw the next generation. So, rattling on. Inclusive planning processes. I mean, I've thrown this slide up, and that's one of our inclusive planning processes. It's a site that I'll show you a picture of it in a second, but actually we just asked the question what might be possible. We acquired an option on this site for £1, and we're playing with it. It's on a functional floodplain, listed building on it, next to a railway line, very small junction going in. Right? So all of the constraints are there, basically, it's stacked up. It's an old milk processing plant, and there is some contamination on site as well as a significant amount of asbestos. So it's got the box set. And the reason that it's really good is because it's in the centre of our community and it's quite critical. So I will give the story about that just to say that actually use the mechanism, again, thinking about using the mechanisms is quite critical. But open and opportunities around those sort of inclusive planning processes. help to change the dialogue. So to answer that question about how do you gain a foothold when you've got no track record, no credibility, mobilise people. So, love it or hate it, and I know you've done it here in Stokes Croft as well, which is absolutely brilliant. In Totnes, there was the No to Costa campaign. That No to Costa campaign was around Costa Coffee wanting to come in, get a change of use on a shop at the bottom of town. There are a significant number of independent coffee shops in Totnes, which is, sorry, where I live. I should have said where I live, shouldn't I? There was a large campaign set up within the community about saying no to Costa. It clearly divided some of the community without a doubt, and there's been need to be sort of healing processes gone on afterwards. But there were 4,000 people signed a petition. There are 8,000 people living in Totnes. Absolutely no reason why Costa shouldn't get a change of use. They got their change of use, went through planning committee, absolutely. What Costa then did is they said, given the strength of opinion that exists within this community, we think it would be probably sensible if we chose not to come, because what will it do to our business? So that thing about how do you engage your community in the narrative that makes sense for them? So that is about where do you live, where's your house, where's your job, what do you get, you know, those sorts of conversations, rather than about should we designate land for employment use, because who the hell knows what you're talking about there? So it's about breaking it down and having that discussion. And as soon as you do that, you tend to find that actually most people decide that they want somewhere decent to live. Most people know that actually they've got somebody who knows somebody who's sofa surfing, or somebody who's older that needs to downsize, and we've got no mechanism of doing it because we can't afford what's currently on the market that doesn't work in our community, because actually we're a low wage economy, we're all trying to make it work, and the house prices are up there. So it's those sorts of processes that you go through in terms of planning processes that help to change the dialogue. Moving on. So, financing. We're doing some work right now. This is coming out of our process around the brownfield site that we're looking at. Sorry, I flipped one. We're talking about stages of risk in terms of finance. I mean, one of the things that we're doing is we're thinking about how do you de-risk development models completely. So, broad steps. There's the pre-development stuff and there's the development stuff. And what we're saying to a range of funders that we're talking to is actually, can we not base a model where we think about it on something like the REBA stages of work? So you do REBA stage 1, you get to that stage, it proves the case, you can open up another avenue, because what you've done is you've de-risked it everywhere. So rather than me going, I think we can build on a 3.5 hectare brownfield site in Totnes that's on a floodplain and has got a listed, you know, it's like nobody in their right mind is going to invest in that for pre-development work. However, if I say, we've done some work for REBA stage 1 that's done this, we've done some work around REBA stage 2 that's shown this, by the time we've got to REBA stage 3, actually the Environment Agency are working with us, as our Natural England, as our Historic England, and we've overcome the constraints. So now what we're doing is we're talking about racking up the finance in a different way. So thinking about how you break the thing down in steps and how you engage with that narrative with those people that are funders is quite critical. Because they won't bite the big cherry, but what they will do is they'll bite-sized chunks of it. What's interesting about it is actually most communities have people that are philanthropists as well. So we've had a significant amount of early-stage philanthropic giving to open up the discussion. And as a consequence of the mobilisation, chunks of philanthropic giving, what you end up with is you end up with a different discussion with the funders, because they're seeing something that is larger, community-based, rooted in some sense, because actually they've had sensible people like Chris and other consultants doing the work to show that you can overcome the constraints, and it starts to shape the dialogue going forward. So just think about, you know, how you open that up in terms of stages of work, and beyond that in terms of larger sites. And I have to say, my experience tends to show me that the scale of ambition within communities is changing. So no longer are we talking about single assets, no longer are we talking about 5 or 6 homes, we are talking about larger scale developments. And what's interesting about those is actually how do you deliver those out as a community organisation that might well have spent £500,000 in terms of pre-development, that you've begged, stole, borrowed, negotiated with funders, etc., etc. How do you deliver out a £70 million scheme when actually you haven't got a track record of doing it? changing the narrative again about how you think about phasing, and when you start thinking about development and actually planning out the development. So start acting as a developer. You start thinking about the constraints that you've got on site that allow you to deliver the thing out once you get to sort of REBA stage 3. So you can actually deliver this thing out. And if you haven't caught up with the REBA stages, on one of the last slide, there's the link to the RIB, Royal Institute of British Architects, and their stages of work. So you'll be able to see what I'm talking about there. 1 minute, okay, I'm going. So what we're now doing is we're saying, actually, this is the mix that creates a social return. So you can see the value of actually inclusive planning process and inclusive design process and mobilising people. You can see the thing about actually you can mix grant funders in there if you're the right sort of structure. And there's a whole bunch of people in that middle ground as social investors, not least of which philanthropists exist as social investors, through to Triodos, through to EDS, and I can't remember, it's Great
Western
Regional, you know. So those sorts of people are in that space, basically. So think about how you diversify the discussion. This is a site. That's where we've got to. It's showing at the moment 90 houses on it, 60 of which will be truly affordable, all held within a land trust. We think the employment space will end up employing at least 100 plus people. We've overcome flood risk. We've been regarded as exemplar by Natural England work we've done. Historic England love it as well. And it's been an inclusive process right the way through the agencies. We're taking this through a community right to build order, because actually what we want to do is we want to mobilise people to get involved democratically as well. So we're now arguing that people should get on the electoral register. So if you're not registered to vote, get on it, because otherwise you won't be able to come out and vote when you get there. What's interesting about it is the support that we've had from all of the statutory agencies, because we wanted to work collaboratively, has been absolutely phenomenal. And where we are is we've spent best part of £500,000 in terms of design work on this. We've got stuff that is radically low carbon, both in terms of build and also in terms of end use as well. So it's built in terms of carpool. We've had over 4,000 meaningful engagements within our own community. When I say meaningful engagements, one of those pictures that showed the postcards coming off of it, we have people tracing stuff, and we've got rooms and rooms and rooms of stuff that has come out of a collaborative design process over a number of months. So where that's led us to is this bit of a model. So we actually think that middle chunk is often missed out on this. And I'm mentioning it now because one of the key things for us is the number of people that have mobilised around this and wanted to get involved. Strangely, we've found that people really do like volunteering with us for some reason. So we are open now for a period of consultation, 7 days a week for 7 weeks. That is staffed by people that are volunteers that we've supported to understand the scheme, understand the process, that wanted to come out of Totnes, and there are lots of them. And what's really interesting about that is some of those people weren't volunteering anywhere else before. There are a number of them that were isolated within the community. So they were going to the doctors for antidepressants and all the rest of it. So strangely enough, as a consequence of an inclusive design-led process, they're not going to the doctors because they're engaged in their community in a different way. We are now talking to our MP about saying, actually, true community-led design processes and true community-led design can do more than just about building houses that are truly affordable for people to live in, that are held in trust in a particular way. It can think about how you overcome and de-stress a whole range of other public services, because you generate and build a cohesive community. There's my list of resources, a whole bunch of others there as well, sort of thing. So there's a load of people on this side of it that are useful to know about in terms of both funding sources and routes through. I mean, So You Want to Build a House is a great book. It's now years old, and I think you can still get it online through the website. It's well worth a look at. On this side, a whole bunch of people that are worth talking to in terms of investment. And one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to say, actually, we need to connect these guys up in a more coherent way, because actually, this is growing. The only route through for this country in terms of housing is if people like you get mobilised and we build houses as communities that really meet the needs that exist within our communities, right? So, my challenge, because I would never do anything other than leave the stage without a challenge, is the discussion around the housing bill and starter homes. Actually, probably starter homes, no bad idea. Whether the model's right in terms of 80% of market value, 5 years living in it and can only be sold on at a cap beyond that, who knows? How developers will bring that forward, question mark. Why doesn't every community hold the land that starter homes come forward in trust within that community? And what we do is we cap it beyond that, so we keep that as true community affordable housing with the model set that is right in terms of the capital development that you can sell it onto within that community forever and a day. Why can't we do that?
Who's the challenge to? To us or to the government?
To everybody. Because I think that's part of developing the new model.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.